The Author versus the Werewolf. A Mutant Ideas production by Bill Couture and Chris Marti. Original music by Cosmic Monster.
Several days later. Enough was enough. That sound came from outside, and I was going to find out what the hell it was. I told myself it was my imagination until it ceased to be remotely convincing. I turned from the window and went through the flickering kitchen lit by the fireplace in the living room to the front door. The flashlight from the windowsill in my hand, I cracked open the door and peered into the darkness. I patted the keys in my pocket for the 6th time out of habit, clicked on the flashlight, and stepped into the cool night. Silence. The buzzing sounds of the woods at night weren't there. I felt the wind slice through my flannel, but there was no sound carried behind the chill. One by one, each tree at the perimeter stared me down with their best poker faces as the flashlight scanned across them. The yard was empty. Nothing. What the hell was that sound? I stepped into the yard, the crunching leaves beneath my feet a metronome punctuating the night. Nothing. Not a damn thing. The flashlight shuddered left to right in my trembling hand. I pointed the light at the alcove where my car was parked and felt my stomach drop into my lower intestine. The visible portion of the car that jutted past the edge of the trees was missing. Not the car, not the fucking car, I said to the trembling flashlight in my hand. The tempo of my steps doubled as I approached the shrouded portion of the property. What I came upon was no vehicle, but a macabre art installation. 5 skulls, 4 dead squirrels, a deer's head, and a severed arm missing its middle finger tethered to a baby tree. Damn, I thought aloud. Up to this point, I'd been isolated with only my imagination. But now, my car was waving at me, beyond totaled, and mocking the fact that I was 100 miles from nowhere. I had no cell service, was running low on food, and someone or something out there with an awareness and intent was grasping for my attention. Shit's becoming quite real, I said to my car, but my car just stared back, not saying a word. A while later. It looked like something gigantic had picked up the entire forest and dropped it. The ground was a tapestry of severed branches and limbs. I wiped the sweat from my forehead with the back of my wrist. The moisture settled into the gritty tangle of hair that ran up my arm. How long was I hiking towards the bridge? I hadn't the faintest clue, but I knew that I had to get out of these woods as fast as my feet could carry me. The rushing water sang a song of inspiration for the exodus back to the convenience store. I'd forgotten to charge my phone, and the strain of reaching out to civilization with no signal was too much for the little device. It returned to the land of the dead in the comfortable hammock of my pocket before I stepped out of the front door. Well, that's the closest thing to a landmark. I mumbled at the pothole in front of the steep drop in terrain. Only a few hundred feet to go. The crunching leaves turned to a belching muck, barely audible over the surging river. The water hadn't only risen exponentially overnight. It wasn't only churning and raging over the bridge. No, that wasn't enough. The river had risen up, pulled the bridge out from its supports, ground it into pieces, and relocated the remnants to the murky depths below. The only way through that rushing water was over, or drowning and hoping to wash up downstream on the opposite shore. I threw up a string of barely coherent expletives, threw down my duffel bag, picked up a rock, and flung it feebly into nature's clearly enunciated "fuck you." It was a long, slow, and very existential trip back to the cabin. The sun was just beginning to set as I trudged through the front door, drenched my head in water from the tap, and set my phone on the windowsill to charge. It wasn't difficult to appreciate the running water and electricity considering the circumstances, but the thought of being trapped here any longer clawed at me like whatever clawed open those animals that first morning here. Later that night, I polished off another bottle and passed out on the couch in the living room. Dull moonlight and dying embers in the fireplace combined to bathe the space in a somber glow. crickets doing their part to add to the soothing ambiance. Hours later, the crack of something hard striking the front door sent me careening from the couch to the floor. I frantically pulled myself up by the coffee table, then the couch, scrambling in a dazed stupor to the iron poker leaning against the fireplace. My half-asleep, half-drunk legs staggered towards the front door, my torso following slightly behind and the fire poker dragging a splintery path on the wooden floor. "You, come here!" I almost made the words out as the second toe of my right foot caught the cord of my cell phone charger and tore it from the socket. I hit the front window with a smack that barely phased the glass but hurt my face like hell. The sound of the crickets was gone. In fact, the only sound in my head was the dull throbbing of my racing pulse. I dislodged the phone charger with an uncoordinated series of kicks and resumed my futile attempts at making anything out of the darkness outside. Nothing. Déjà vu. Obviously, it was the same nothing that turned my car into a nightmare, and the same nothing just threw something in my front door. "Fuck it," I mumbled while unlocking the front door and opening it a crack. At first, I couldn't be sure what the severed limb at my feet belonged to, beast or foliage. I swallowed the tightness in my throat and prodded the object with the fire poker. To my relief, the pointed metal scraped against bark. Worse than its bite, I continued the thought aloud, belching a foul cloud of queasiness from the whiskey sloshing in my half-empty stomach. I hope. The wind threatened to force its way through the crack in the doorway, standing the hair on the back of my neck on end and momentarily knocking me off balance. It was one thing to stand in the wind. It was another to feel it hold me at knife point. I pushed the heavy wooden door shut, locked the deadbolt, and slid the chain back into place, as if that would keep anything out that was reasonably motivated to get in. I noted the irony of the rattling windows on either side of the door. It definitely wouldn't take much motivation, the wind reminded me. The path carved by the fire poker from the fireplace to my battle with the window led to the third most disturbing discovery of the night. In the darkness of my drunken frenzy, I had practically eviscerated the cheap phone charger and wall socket with that simple misstep. A while later. The crossbow was stashed in a chest in the basement, a remnant of my jackass uncle's failed attempt at a hobby. There was only enough food to keep me alive for a week or so if I rationed carefully. Considering the lack of civilization, that being the woods population 0 to 4, I didn't expect Uncle Sam sending in the cavalry. Hunting wasn't something I wanted to do, was particularly good at, or had even attempted since my early teens. I didn't care for it, but I respected animals enough to know how to face my food. Family plus cabin plus woods equal, here kid, let's show you a thing or two about the laws of nature. Seasonally repeat this equation until adolescence and then escape reality by firing violent words onto a piece of paper or computer screen. Then apparently come full circle by returning to the woods. What a narrative twist. I set out in a different direction this time with newfound confidence, the aforementioned crossbow, to see if I could find any clues about the interloper. After 2 miles of traveling the river upstream, I came across the uncanny remnants of someone's idea of a twisted good time. I approached the derelict campsite as if it could come to life at any moment. My eyes scanned from clue to clue, trying to take in the remains of what must have been a chaotic scene. In the center of it all, the blackened remains of a makeshift fire pit, obviously not built by any Eagle Scout. Surrounding it, the footprints of a scuffle bisected by deep imprints that stood out as a clear sign of several considerable objects being dragged away from the area. It was safe to assume that those objects were people. There was another set of heel prints that followed the path of what had been removed from the scene, but as I traced their path, I saw it started a ways before the campsite. I followed the trail through the loose foliage, spotting several dark stains in the mud. Blood? Yeah, probably. Might as well be. Yeah, that's blood. Definitely blood. I froze mid-step. Not because of the blood, mind you. What I was seeing didn't make any logical sense, but all the same, it was there. A car stuck out of the mud, vertically. The trunk of the car faced the sky, the back windshield shattered. Mud had poured into the interior of the front end of the car. I circled the vehicle to examine it from every possible angle, struggling to picture what in the hell could have unfolded to leave such a scene. Grabbing onto the edge of the rear bumper, I pulled myself up to look.
We apologize for the missing portion of this story. And now, the following chapter.
A while later. Hunting, gathering, and filtering water, specifically upstream from the wildlife massacre and constantly looking over my shoulder, became part of my routine as the days blurred into each other. Something big was strangling my water supply as well. The shower trickled now and again, the toilet flushed when I filled the tank with a bucket, but I knew I was lapping up the very last drops of civilization. I never really appreciated the potential of the cabin's fireplace until it was my only means of cooking. The electricity flickered off at some point, but I couldn't be sure when. By then, I had already cleaned out the refrigerator, and what little dry rations I had lived on the kitchen counter. Is this living freely? I typed my inner monologue onto the page. I meant to type the next sentence in the story, but it was getting hard for me to tell where one ended and the other began. I glanced out of the window at the moon at its regular place in the sky. It seemed awfully close. I reached under the desk and wrapped my fingers around the neck of a fresh bottle of unlabeled whiskey, a potpourri of the remnants of 6 to 7 brands. Cold moonlight poured through the bottle as I rotated it around in my hands and watched the image of the window warp and shift. Through my fingertips, I caught the distorted silhouette of a stranger standing outside my window. I remembered the squirrel's visit from earlier, the one that showed me the severed finger. Maybe now is not the best time for another drink, I thought to myself. I placed the bottle down and peered out into the darkness. There wouldn't be any sleep tonight. No one had any business walking through the property at... Never mind. Like me, the old alarm clock had given up keeping track of time. Where was I? No one had any business walking through the property, especially if they're the same no one that had been tormenting me since I arrived. That's it! I made what felt like my billionth storm to the front door. Whoever the hell this, I muttered under my breath, grabbing the poker and flashlight in one motion as I descended the stairs. There were countless rehearsals for tonight's performance. I wanted to believe it was courage, but a cold sweat of animal fear was seeping from every pore in my body. A drop came speeding from behind my ear and down my spine. Shocked by the sensation, I ran my hand across the back of my neck, the sweat sticking to the overgrown hair that was starting to connect the base of my skull to my shoulders. The word haircut flashed in my mind, but the adrenaline pushed it right out. I flung open the front door and stormed into the yard. Nothing. Again, the great cosmic joke unfolded. The flashlight cautiously scanned the yard. I stood with my weight on one leg, ready to put my entire body into the swing of the deadly fire poker. Suddenly, a branch snapped just past the tree line. I swung the flashlight around in time to catch the outline of someone taking off in a full sprint from behind one trunk to another in a flurry of dead leaves and hair. Hey, you... man, fuck! My footsteps gave me no hope of stealth as I descended into the shadow of the trees. My grip on the fire poker was starting to loosen from the sweat collecting in my palms. I knew I was getting close to whoever that was. It couldn't have been far from the edge of the trees. From over my right shoulder, I heard the slightest crunch of leaves grab hold of my eardrum and tug. I stumbled and spun around, barely catching myself in time to drop the flashlight and fire poker and turn back towards the source of the sound. It was shaped like a man, so out of habit I raised my hand to wave as neighborly as I could muster. I was getting a little rusty at human interaction. The figure, catching the glimpse of me, did what anyone else in a situation of conditioned social commitment would have done, and waved back. I, keeping my eyes glued to the man's dark silhouette, crouched down and picked up the flashlight again. In the light, the silhouette revealed itself to be covered with thick, wiry hair. Crack dog-like nails sprouted from flat-arched feet. The flashlight climbed to its distorted face. It was something half human, half something. As I raised my flashlight on it, the thing made an expression and tried to support something like a greeting. It failed and grit its teeth before running off back into the dark. I was left paralyzed, the trembling flashlight locked on the space where it was standing. The hairy thing's thumping steps continued on, deeper and deeper into the woods, until they became a gentle, steady tapping in the mud of the lake. then fading into the non-existence of the woods. My mind was lost in the image of the creature. For some reason, I couldn't stop thinking of Wile E. Coyote. Delirious, I walked back to the cabin and lay down on the couch. I hoped the transforming were-thing waving to me was something I'd imagined. After all, I'd come out here to rediscover horror. The truth was, neither I nor the werewolf knew how to proceed. I thought about werewolves the rest of the night. I thought about why people go into the woods. Surely not to be seen. I also couldn't remember the last time I looked in a mirror. Which then brought me to, how long have I been out here? Each unanswered question made me feel more alone and less human. Things were bad out there, but they were bad inside as well. The werewolf. Sometimes, when the werewolf dreamed, it dreamt of a pasty middle-aged guy sitting by a fence. On the other side of the fence lived a dog that barked from sunup through sundown. Every single day the dog barked endlessly. The man loathed the mangy thing. His joy in life was passing time in his backyard, on his lawn, in his folding chair, watching the moon. It could have been a memory, either the man's or the dog's. Who could tell? Probably just a fading recollection of some victim along the way. As it stood, that distinction made little difference to the creature as it existed now. The man's eyes didn't match his smile, and they had a way of following without moving. The dream wasn't a comforting one. There were matching houses, and the sounds of sprinklers going somewhere in the background. The werewolf may have retreated to the woods, but like all American horror stories, it probably began in the suburbs. Not all men are dogs. Some are. Not everyone eats people. Some do. They're out in the woods, collecting souls of their victims, trapped in a decaying orbit around themselves. The souls haunted the hairy devil, helping it achieve a particularly special degree of madness. The werewolf didn't fully understand it, but bad dogs seldom know when they're just waiting to be put out of their misery. Sometimes people get lost in the woods until they're no longer people. The werewolf had eaten some people. Maybe a lot. It had gotten fuzzy. When it stopped long enough, they appeared. The souls of the damned, the victims. The werewolf had become their pet, their tie, tethering them cruelly to this world. They cared for the werewolf, cared enough to torture it. "You're a bad dog," one said. "You were a man," another said. The werewolf ate, and there was just enough of a memory of its past life to make it cry out into the night. A sound something between a howl and a scream.
To be continued. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe at Mutant Ideas, www.mutantideas.com. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, you are not alone with your thoughts. This has been a Mutant Ideas production of The Author vs. the Werewolf. Story by Bill Couture and Chris Marti. Narrated by Chris Marti and featuring Lina Dunn as the Squirrel. Original music by Cosmic Monster. The Author vs. the Werewolf Illustrated Storybook and Soundtrack Cassette Tape coming soon.